I'm scared now.
There we go. All happening now. Here we go.
The music hasn't come yet, has it?
No, it's Adam's such a pro.
Listen, it's not it's me, it's bloody Instagram. Welcome back to episode 243 of the Tall Boy Radio podcast. And as we always say, who knows where it goes when the beer flows? Well, it could be flowing over the channel tonight, one way or the other, we shall see. First thing, though, I have to say a big welcome to anybody listening in country number 67, China.
Who'd have thunked it?
Who would have thunked it, indeed? But I tell you what, dude, I don't know what's going on over there, but we've obviously been promoted on some kind of platform, and China is now our fourth most popular country. It's got as many listeners as we have in Ireland, which has been, we've had a pretty...
Which is 5, right?
Yeah, oh no, it's not that many.
Yeah, you think we're joking.
Well, yeah, indeed. So, before I introduce our guest, who we just heard there, let's say hello to Gaz. How you been doing, dude?
Yeah, I'm okay, kidder. Yeah, all good. Sort of been a bit of a busy week at work, so not managed to do much. If I'm honest, went through a bit of I've submitted a bit of an exam, I suppose, paper. So 12 to 14 weeks, we'll find out the results. So fingers crossed. We'll wait and see what happens, but I'm hoping that it's some good news. But no, looking forward to this. Look, it's always great when we have guests on board and guests that we haven't had on before. So really, really, really looking forward to picking the guests' brains on sort of the topic that we're going to talk about. I won't give too much away. I think it's only right that we now speak to Dave and ask Dave how he's been, because it's been a couple of weeks actually, David. I think we sort of been missed each other, as such, as they say.
Yeah, I was not too clever last week, and I think people were on holiday the week before, or maybe even the week before that. So it seems like a few weeks. Yeah. I'm quite well now, but guys, I have just got to ask a question. You just said you're just hoping for good results with an exam, but aren't you already like the deputy head? It's a bit late for taking your exams.
Yeah, so it's actually my MPQH, so it's actually my headship exam. So it's basically a week-long case study, and it opened like last Monday and had to submit it the Monday just gone. So you get like 7 days to complete the case study. So that's all been submitted. So 12 to 14 weeks, we'll wait and see.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to that result. And I just want to also welcome our guest who introduced herself a bit earlier. She'll be formally introduced in a moment. Just point of reference for future guests. Keep your trap short until you're introduced. And swearing is allowed. I'll just say that.
It is. So if you want to call David something now, you're more than welcome. But Deborah, how are you doing? Would you like to say hello officially?
I mean, officially or unofficially, right? I'm here. Yeah. So, hello. And I couldn't let that opportunity go by. Like, you guys were so into it about your listeners in China, which is really exciting. But I had to have a little, I mean, come on. No. You left the room there and someone had to take the gap. And it can't be David because, he's part of the crew. But I can do it. And did you see David's face, though? Like, he was, immediately regretting his life choices, having me on the show. Like, it was instantaneous. Yeah.
David regrets his life choices every week, every Tuesday night. I can promise you that.
Yeah, no doubt about it.
And yet he comes back. David, indeed. Blink twice if you need help.
Anyway, Deborah, did you want to tell us then a little bit about what you're here to talk about this evening?
I'm not really sure. Like David just said, I'm joking. So myself and David were chatting. So we know each other through the broader Disrupt HR family. And we just got to chatting. And if folks are wondering where my accent is from, I am South African. And I've been living in the UK now with my husband and my kids for near on 4 years. So we were going to chat a little bit about being an immigrant in this country and about diversity and about the experience of, being away from everything that you've ever known. And actually, initially, when we started chatting about this topic, I think it was before the general election here in the UK. But I think it's still very topical, just this whole discussion with, the US election looming. And I think just some of the rhetoric around immigrants and migrants and people's perception around, go back to where you came from. So yeah, a bit of a heavy topic, but hopefully some fun along the way as well. Hopefully a couple of laughs, our misfortunes.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. I'll try not to laugh at the bits that I shouldn't do. But yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So immigration, like you say, bit of a thorny issue with some. Some people are very opinionated with a little bit of knowledge, and some people are very opinionated with no knowledge whatsoever. So what we're going to try and do is, rather than addressing the opinion, is hopefully address some of the knowledge tonight. So I'd be curious to know then, from your experience, what made you choose Britain? Why did you choose to come over here and take our jobs, take our women?
I mean, payback for colonialism springs to mind. No. So no, my husband is British actually, and I think just the general crime and economic decline in South Africa. So we were talking for a while about where would we potentially go. Do we see ourselves staying here and getting old in this country? Can we guarantee a future for our children? I think the kinds of things that a lot of parents, the kinds of decisions that a lot of parents grapple with and have done for hundreds of years, and that has informed the very difficult decision to pack up and move to an unknown place. So because my husband is British and he lived in the UK for like 12 years before coming to South Africa and getting married and having kids and everything, it seemed to kind of make sense. Language was also a consideration. I mean, the weather didn't win any points, obviously, but it just seemed like I think culturally, you've got limited choices, and I mean, being from South Africa and having been an ex-colony, there's a lot of similarities, I think, in culture. So it was kind of the UK, Ireland, where the weather is even worse, Canada, where it's freezing all the time, or maybe Australia, which is full of South Africans anyway. But that just feels really far. And there's more things in Australia that can kill us than there are in South Africa. So here we are. Chose a different island. Yeah.
Yeah, fair play. So with your husband being British then, did that cut down on the red tape, or was it still a bit of a nightmare?
Well, it was a nightmare for me. And interestingly, it's good that you asked that. So, I mean, obviously there's various different options for visas, right? So obviously because my husband is British and the children fortunately are as well, even though they were born in South Africa, they're dual nationals. Obviously there was no red tape for my husband or the kids, but for me there was a fair amount of red tape because I have come across on a spousal visa, which means that my husband is my visa sponsor. And there's a whole process around that, which I'm happy to talk you through and explain. Not like the technicalities, but, just some of the crazy things. Like, we've been married for 16 years. And when we applied the first time for my visa, we obviously had to submit all of this documentation to prove that we legitimately know each other and have met in person. We needed letters from friends to confirm that they know us and have been to our home, and, photographs from our wedding. And you get this weird questionnaire that you have to complete as well. Like, where did you meet? When did you meet? Were you present at your wedding? Where was the wedding? So I don't know what's been happening and who's been trying to bring what kind of alleged spouse with them to the UK. But yeah, some very, very interesting questions around just kind of checking that we legitimately are actually married. Yeah.
So if your husband's your sponsor, does that mean he can stop sponsoring you anytime?
Well, effectively, yes. It's actually really, it's actually a little bit scary, to be honest with you, because obviously for a spouse to sponsor you, they need to be earning a certain amount of money to show that they can take care of you, because you don't qualify for any benefits. So even though we have kids, like if we had to split up tomorrow, I'd be slightly snookered, because it's weird, the perception that people have around visas and being here, and think I've heard a lot of rhetoric, I think, for people who are rather uninformed, seeming to think that this is the land of milk and honey, which I'm sorry to tell all of you, it's really not. I mean, it's nice enough, but it's not as cool as everyone thinks or tries to pretend that it is. And secondly, that there's this giant pot of money that all the immigrants are grabbing at. And it actually says on my residence card, no public funds. So, and that's another thing as well, which is before you even submit your visa application, there's a step before that where you have to pay your NHS fees for the visa period in advance. Wow. So I'm literally not a drain on the country at all. And I think a lot of people don't know that. So anyone who is a legal immigrant in this country, we have paid our way, not only in terms of the visa fees themselves, which are astronomical, but we have paid for the privilege of using the NHS, and we've paid for the visa period in advance.
Well, I didn't know that, and it sort of shocks me in a way to think that that's the case, and again, that's the naivety of, I suppose, 85-90% of the population. They probably wouldn't know that, and again, that's something that they come over here and this, that, and without knowing the due process that they've gone through, and perhaps some of the fees that they paid, and some of the red tape that they've gone through. A question that I just want to sort of take you back to, Deborah, was you say you obviously your husband was from the UK, you from South Africa. The decision to move here as opposed to South Africa, do you have family in South Africa, and did he have family in the UK, and was the sort of wider family and the support network a contributory factor to the decision, or was it literally you looked at the economic climate of South Africa and thought, no, we literally can't, even though my family might be here, we can't stay here, and therefore that was why we were going to move?
I think there were so many factors, so when we met initially, he was living and working in London still, and we were actually introduced by a mutual friend who is South African, right, and had come back to South Africa. I mean, I was born there and lived there my entire life, and a mutual friend introduced us, and back in the day, we started out emailing each other, and then eventually those conversations kind of moved on to Skype. And there was actually a conversation before we got married around where would we settle? Would I come here, or would he go to South Africa? Yeah. And back then, interestingly enough, and I think he made the sacrifice because I was quite close to my parents, and I don't think I would have easily left while my parents were still alive. So right. I think it was easier for him to kind of to leave the UK and come to me. And we were also a lot younger, so came to South Africa, started a family, everything was great. But then COVID was really kind of like the final nail in the coffin in terms of, we spoke a couple of times about should we leave, is the time. And then COVID was just the final thing that just was the final deciding factor. And I think what maybe made it a little bit easier for me was that both of my parents have subsequently passed, so in terms of family, there isn't really family left over for me. And I think for anyone who's married and has kids, it gets to that point where like your little family, that's your family. Like that's, yes, you've got your parents and your siblings, but at the end of the day, what really matters is these little people that you've made together, Yeah. Yeah. So that was so we actually came here with no family or friends for either of us. You're right. In the UK, really. He had a couple of friends from way back in the day, but they all live around London and we don't. And that's another interesting thing is how we ended up living in West Sussex, but I'll get to that just now.
So that must have been quite hard then, I suppose, in terms of he has no, at the time, maybe no real support network. You definitely didn't have sort of a support network, and you're bringing across, I assume, like a young family, and I'm just curious in terms of how does that develop then? Because in terms, you're going out and you might go to local restaurant, or you might go out to the local cinema, but with a young family, that's incredibly difficult, I suppose, because you can't go to the pub and sit at the end of the bar and chat to a couple of people because actually you've got a young family with you. So what was that process like in terms of sort of almost, this is going to sound really weird, but like making friends?
We don't have any friends. We're not very nice people. No. So, David's like, yeah, they're not.
David hasn't got any friends, no.
So interestingly, and again, all of this it's amazing how the universe works and just how opportunities present themselves and how you find your people. So number one, I chose Chichester, West Sussex, off of the interwebs. Never been here. I'd actually never been to the UK.
Wow. Okay.
And he was like, since we're making this big move and he's got a home-based contract, he was like, we can live anywhere in the UK as long as it's not London. He was like, I didn't enjoy being a single guy in London, and I can assure you it's not going to be a vibe going back with the wife and 2 kids in tow, And I actually Googled sunniest place in the UK. And I found a town it's probably about 5 to 10 miles away from here, called Bognor Regis. It's right on the ocean.
Yeah.
And I wasn't entirely enamored with what I saw. So I widened my search a little bit, and I found Chichester, this place that I had never heard of ever, or seen any pictures of, and just absolutely loved everything that I saw. And I was like, right, this is it. This is where we're going. Wow. And then I did, I think, a very 21st century thing. I joined the local Chichester Facebook group. And obviously we needed a place to stay. And it turns out it's very difficult finding a rental property from another country.
Yeah.
During a pandemic as well. Very difficult.
Yeah.
And I posted on the group. I was like, we're having difficulties. And a South African messaged me and said, live in Chai with my husband, DM me, we can chat. Yeah. And just the nicest people. So they became friends. And the really nice thing is that they're still friends.
Right.
And then made a couple of other friends as well, literally before we moved here. Made some friends online. And then obviously over time, you meet people through the kids' school, and, they've got little friends, and you meet other parents. And then you kind of start working and you meet people like David, and, you make friends. Your circle kind of grows. Yeah. But yes, it is hard. It is very, very isolating. And I think even now, almost 4 years in, our circle still isn't what it was in Johannesburg. Right. Our lives are very different. It's just because the lifestyle here is so different as well. Yeah. So it is an adjustment, big time.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine. So one thing then, when you were in Johannesburg and you were looking over to Britain, well, I don't know how close a tab you kept on the politics of everything that was going on. Obviously you must have been made aware of Brexit, or you've heard about Brexit, but since you came over here, how much impact did that have on you while you were there and since you've been here?
Look, I mean, when Brexit was happening, I think the rest of the world, much like many people here in the UK, was looking on in absolute shock and disbelief. Like, how is this even happening? And Brexit definitely had an impact, I think, possibly on my visa application process. I think I don't know to what extent, but it would have still been as difficult, I think, to come here. It probably would have been easier to go to like Ireland or somewhere else, because the application process is completely different for EU citizens who are bringing their family. Like it's just different. But I think the main impact in terms of Brexit, what was very clear, and another thing that people don't know, is I can't just travel anywhere that I want to, because passport privilege is a real thing. And, my whole family can hop on a plane or hop on a ferry and go to France or go wherever they want to in Europe. I need a visa. I am not allowed. So it's just it's silly little things like that.
You see, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Genuinely, that's something that, because we take, I say, free travel, free transport
for granted, completely,
almost for granted, and it's like, you know, if we want to go on holiday, we want to travel, or and I understand if you're going to a place and you're going to spend 5 or 6 months there, and you might go on like a work visa for 6 months, and I sort of understand that, and you know, lots of people have gone over to Australia for a period of time on a work visa, and then within 6-12 months you've got to come back because that expires, and I get that, but it never actually crossed my mind that we don't.
Privilege is real.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't need visas to go wherever it is in terms of holidays or travel, whereas you probably would do that, and that's actually quite shocking, really, when you think about it.
I need a visa to go pretty much anyway. And the other interesting thing is one of the things. So coming over here, the first time you get a visa for 3 years to stay in the UK. And then obviously about 6 months before that period is up, you need to apply for your next visa, which is valid for 2 years. Right. And part of that application process is once again proving that we are still legitimately married, getting local UK people to write letters and confirm they've been to our house, we live together. We've got to submit post, you know, over at least a 12-month period to prove that we're both getting our mail at the same address.
Yeah.
And then they want a log of every single trip you've made out of the country, where you went, and how long for. And I hadn't traveled anywhere because it's just too much of a ball ache to get a damn visa every time I want to go somewhere. But when I went for my biometrics appointment, the lady actually sat there and like they try and make it seem that it's all casual, but she was like paging through every page of my freaking passport.
Really?
Just to see if there was maybe a stamp in there and I'd maybe been somewhere that I hadn't declared. So yeah, they're quite strict about that stuff.
Wow,
it sounds like the amount of effort that they take seems a bit disproportionate.
Thank you for saying that. It's like, what is in it for me? What is in it? Like, I just, I'm not going to go. Look, sometimes I do want to go somewhere where my husband and children aren't. But like, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? I'm obviously going to be with my family. And yes, I would, but I still freelance. I haven't really, it hasn't been that easy actually to say, okay, fine, the kids are good, everything's good. I can throw myself into a job and fully commit, And it is a hassle. It is a ball ache. And I'm going to have to do it again, David. I've got to do it next year again. And I think next year the fee has gone up to £5,000 that I have to pay for the privilege of being here. So yeah, it is expensive. It is a lot of admin. And as you say, yeah, what is the payoff besides getting to stay with my husband and kids?
Well, yeah, and I hope that's worth the payoff. By the way, I don't know your husband, I don't know your kids, but
sometimes.
So, I'm just dead curious now. So, when you first applied for the first visa, was it? And excuse my ignorance, I'm assuming there's a difference between a work visa and a residential visa, and therefore, did you apply straight away for like the residential visa because you knew that this was where you wanted to stay, and then on the residential visa, are you then allowed to effectively find employment straight away? Is there a prolonged period of time in which you can't do that, or?
So I'm fortunate. I was allowed to work, immediately.
Right.
I've got other friends from South Africa where the husband, I think, is here on a highly skilled visa. So his company, I think, sponsored him to be here, but didn't sponsor his wife and kids. So again, they had to pay all of those fees out of pocket. And interestingly, one of her conditions on her residency is that she's not allowed to coach professional netball teams. She played netball competitively in South Africa, but like when we were in high school. So it's like a weird It's a very niche thing. She's allowed to work, but she's not allowed to coach any sports teams.
Wow.
I'm not allowed to coach netball either, I don't think.
Well, no.
Well, yeah.
Also,
You need
that
a little bit of skill to be able to do that in the first place, though.
might
Do
be
you?
why. That might be why.
So, in terms of then, you've paid visa, and you mentioned that it was, did you say £5,000 for the next one? Is that something that every second year or every third year you would have to pay? Because again, that I'm like being really naive now. I didn't realize. My assumption was you pay you pay your initial visa fee, whatever it may be, and then once you're here, effectively, once you set up residency, then you set up residency. I didn't realize that there was almost whether it's an annual or biannual or triannual fee that you have to pay.
So it's a 5-year process minimum.
Right.
And then you can apply for what they call indefinite leave to remain. Like say, yeah, I'm probably going to live here now. But again, you pay for that privilege, and you pay your NHS fees and things. And then after that 5 years, I think it's another year, and you can actually apply to naturalize.
Okay.
And then it's a different, but still, that's still 6 years. You know,
Wow.
it's a long process, and it's expensive. So first one is 3 years, and then 2 years, and then
another year.
Yeah.
Is the process different because your husband was living in South Africa and the kids were born in South Africa? So would it have been the same if the husband had been in the UK and you just met him on holiday and then moved over? It's not different because he's lived over there.
No. The only thing, again, a weird thing, and I don't know if it's because it was COVID and they were trying to like drag their feet. One of the things they questioned, which again, like, you know, is we ended up needing to get a DNA paternity test to prove that he is our daughter's father. Because when her birth certificate got issued when she was born, Home Affairs in South Africa issued a document that only had my name on it and not his.
Wow.
So I see you shaking your head. So they issued our son with his passport, no problems. And nothing was happening with our daughter's passport, nothing was happening. And then the story now came through because hubby's name wasn't on the birth certificate. And again, massive thing, only, you know, certain places accredited by whatever institution to do these tests. And yeah, our whole family had to trottle off to the doctor's office and do a cheek swab and whole chain of custody thing. And sign here and sign here and seal this envelope and courier to these people. It was a whole thing.
Oh, and was that just was that effective and a horrible phrase, a clerical error, or was that just process? So was it that everybody goes through that process, or was that just an error that was either an oversight?
It was just a freak clerical error because someone at Home Affairs in South Africa hadn't put his name on the birth certificate. Right, and they had on our sons. So they didn't question the son.
Yeah.
But so even though the daughter is older, and she was like, we'd been married for about 2 or 3 years when she was born. And then another 2 years later, we had our son. So, I mean, logically speaking, if you look at this whole show and you go, okay, well, married for 2 years, have one kid, you know, 2 years later, have another kid. That kind of sounds like the natural progression of starting a family.
Yeah.
But no. So yeah, DNA testing and everything.
So so what they're thinking there is you obviously got married, met someone just because you wanted a British passport. So just to concoct this whole
and it's
plan,
so easy to get one, isn't it?
And you'd also decided that you were going to smuggle in somebody else's child,
obviously,
as well as your own child, which was born after.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I've been pulling the wool over this unsuspecting Brit's eyes for many, many years.
I think I saw an episode of Jeremy Kyle about that.
No, it's look, I mean, you know, when you watch shows like, I mean, probably none of you guys watch shows like 90 Day Fiance or whatever. You see these British people going on holiday and then they now meet some person. And then you hear the commentary and you know, are you sure? And maybe they just want to marry you for a green card. And I'm like, where do you get this? The UK doesn't have a green card. That's an American thing. Where are you getting this from? So yeah, no, it's even if I had come to the UK, I think ironically, actually, possibly I wouldn't have been able to come to the UK when we first got married, because I don't know back then, and I stand to be corrected, I don't know back then if hubby was earning enough to be able to sponsor me, because he's got to prove, and this is the same for anyone doing a spousal visa, your sponsor has to prove that they can support you and the kids, obviously, even if you don't ever work, because no public funds. So yeah, I don't know if I could have come back then.
It's a very, very different picture that is painted by the British media and the opinions that that influences. Yeah, it is. So just on that then, what has been the attitude and approach of the good old Joe Public of Great Britain been towards you? Have you had any incidents? Have you felt like you were an unwelcome guest, as it were?
I haven't felt unwelcome, and that's an interesting thing. And I think Dave and I touched on this as well when we were like, yeah, this might be an interesting thing to talk about, and it's an uncomfortable thing to talk about. I haven't had any incidents, really. I think there's so many South Africans in the country and so many people from lots of other countries that I think probably the majority of British people are used to, dealing with immigrants and different accents. That's the one thing. I think the other thing for me, and this is a very inconvenient truth, is that perhaps it's been a little bit easier because I look like the majority of people in this country. We don't know what my experience might have been otherwise. Interestingly, however, my children have had issues at school.
Right.
So, and they, I mean, you hear lots of stories from other South Africans where children get bullied or teased because of their accent. But my children have, at various different stages, been called tourists. They've been told to go back to where they come from. And it's like, all that we can say is obviously these kids are hearing this from their parents, because where else would 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old kids get this language from? But yeah, my kids have been called tourists. I think that was and go back to where you came from, you don't belong here. It happens.
You see, I feel ashamed about that because that's so bad. That's so naive. That's so like uneducated, and I'm sure that it happens in most countries, because I think and without going down the necessarily the political argument as such, but you look at the States and you look at the UK and you look at Australia and you look at your more westernized countries, like immigration is like right at the top of their like key priorities sort of thing. But it's so divisive, and I hate it. I hate when people start talking about it, because there's no reason why it, and this is going to sound really awful, but there's no reason why it shouldn't work, if that makes sense. And I just don't get it. I don't get the anti-immigration bit. You look
I think it's that whole people are stealing our jobs, though, isn't? And it's a way of othering. Times are tough financially. People are having a difficult time, and there's got to be something or someone to blame.
Yes,
and it's so easy to say it's these people. They, because it's that othering. These outsiders are coming in and they're taking our jobs, and it's like, what job of yours am I stealing? Because
I think there's. I mean, look, I think there's a difference between people who and you're in a way you're illegal immigrants, and you're legal sort of people that come in terms of there's a lot of jobs that are available for very skilled people, and they might be UK based, they might be foreign based, but there's a market for that, and I've got no issue with that whatsoever, and that's absolutely fine. And I suppose the difference is really people that are coming in genuinely with family and have and that they're going to contribute to the economy and they're going to contribute to jobs and incomes and all of that. And then there's a difference between people that see the UK as, I suppose, a haven and a way of just receiving money for doing nothing. And I suppose there's a difference between the two. And if it's the former, I've got absolutely zero issues with that whatsoever. Look, people like yourself, Deborah, that come into the UK, are working, are contributing to the economy, are raising a family, and so on and so on and so on. There's absolutely not one person can tell me and try to convince me that by you doing that you are disadvantaging anybody in the UK from doing that. And I don't, and I wholly subscribe to that. I think there's a difference from what you've done to potentially some people that will come over as illegal immigrants and are trying to sort of, and look, there's lots of war-torn countries and lots of poverty in the world. There's lots of places that people want to escape from, and I absolutely get that. But I think it's the perception is the people that come over, and it's a bit of a horrible phrase, but almost sponge off the economy, I suppose. I have an issue with that. People who come over and are illegal but come for genuine reasons, and this is why it's so difficult to pin down, because people might come over and become illegal immigrants but come for the right reason, because they're coming from a war-torn country, that they've got massive upheaval where they come from, and so it's really difficult to pin down. But somebody in your situation where you come in here, you're raising a family, you're contributing to, I don't subscribe to that. You come in to steal our jobs and take all our money and all of that. That's just bobbins as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I know what you're coming from. I know exactly where you're coming from, guys. And unfortunately, though, those lines are blurred. And those lines are blurred by people like Nigel Farage and their nonsense that they spout on a daily basis.
Wow, we got to nearly 40 minutes before we mentioned Mr. Farage. I can't believe it's only 15 seconds in and he's mentioned him now.
Hey, we done well.
Dude, you did well.
Yeah, as Will Smith would say, we'll try and keep that man's name out of our
out of our face.
But yeah, so what do you make of that then? There's people like them and the rhetoric that these people spout. I mean, it gets under my skin. I know it gets under Dave's skin, and as Gaz is saying there, he gets under his skin as well. What's your perception of it? You know, you've got a little bit more skin in the game.
I think all of us kind of share the same thing. I don't think any of us begrudge any person the right to seek a better life and try and build a better life. And if that then means leaving everything and everyone they've ever known and seeking that life elsewhere, you know, history is full of that happening. South Africa is a land of immigrants, you know, and not just because of colonialism, but South Africa is a land of immigrants. The US is a land of immigrants, Australia. Like, this is something that's been going on for hundreds of years. And I think we all respect that concept of, you know, wanting to make things better, wanting to find your fortune, live a good life. But there is, I think, a stigma attached to being a refugee, fleeing a bad situation. And it's interesting, I think, how the world has evolved and how the language has evolved. And you see it a lot amongst a couple of politicians, both here and across the Atlantic, who shall not be named, who spews similar things. And there's this, you know, if you work hard and you are middle class, wealthy, somehow that is equated with being good. Whereas if you are battling financially and you're going through a tough time, or you're a refugee or whatever it is, somehow that is bad and lazy. You know, so there's that layer, I think, to the stories. And then the other thing, like you've rightfully said, there's so much that people don't know. And then the term immigrant is used as this catch-all phrase for people like me who are legal immigrants and have to pay for everything and have to go through this massive administrative process. And, you know, and then there are people who are refugees and there are people who are illegal migrants. But calling that entire group immigrant is also problematic because it blurs that line. And then and then you take it further with this point system around, you've got to have so many points to get into the country. And with that as well, like, it's eliminating entire population and economic groups from that opportunity. Also just increasing the threshold. I mean, the current threshold, again, I stand to be corrected. I should have probably checked it. But I think it's something like £38,200 a year or 38,800 is the minimum salary that you have to earn to be able to apply to bring your spouse here.
Right.
So they don't care how long you've been married. If you're not earning that money, and if you think how many people in the UK are earning under 35k a year, I think there's a very large group,
large proportion of people, yeah,
who cannot bring their family because they don't earn enough. So again, that's another way of othering. I can complain about the process, and I can complain about the weather and all kinds of other things, but at the end of the day, I'm very thankful for the fact that we are fortunate enough that my husband earns enough. And it almost feels like what the government is saying is that his family is deemed more worthy of an opportunity than someone who doesn't earn as much. And there's something in that which is dark and disturbing.
And it's almost like a means testing for immigration, isn't it? And that's like just a horrible place, just a horrible place to be in, because who makes that decision? Who makes that benchmark? Who makes the decision that it's 38,000 or whatever the mark may be? Who is it that makes that? Where's the justification for that figure?
And how was it quantified? It seems so arbitrary.
Yes, yeah, it's almost like a we'll pick that figure, and then anybody that earns below that figure, well, you're not worthy enough. You can't provide, and there will be many occasions where people that earn below that will be able to provide, and
100%.
So it just and it just seems wrong to me that it's like a means testing sort of thing. I don't get it.
No, I mean, I think for me, all of this, when you look at it, is very, very peculiar. I find the idea of just borders in themselves quite odd. You know what I mean? They're not there. We've put them there.
Yeah.
We've put things in people's way. Now, a little bit different in Britain because we're an island, so you get that little island mentality. But if you look at like mainland Europe, those lines are all pretty, they're just like been randomly drawn on a map, and then you visas
fought over for many years, but back in the day, sort of thing. But yes, I take your point. It's literally just a piece of land.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's why I mentioned Europe rather than Israel or Palestine. Or something
good shout, dude.
Yeah, I thought I'd steer away from that one. But I just find it absolutely bizarre. When we break it down, that we're putting these boundaries there for people to overcome. And when you think that we are all one race, we are all a human race after all, irrespective of the accent. Christ almighty, the different accents that you can find in Britain alone, you know what I mean, is utterly bizarre. But I mean the British accent there as well. I'm not saying the people who speak like Deborah.
No. The accents are a real thing. Sometimes it's difficult for me to understand. I mean, I'm quite proud of myself now that I can recognize like a Yorkshire accent versus a Birmingham accent, and people from like Newcastle, like I can hear the difference.
Yeah.
But it's difficult. And as you say, we've created all of these barriers, and then we complain, and working in HR, we complain about, talent crisis and talent shortage. And it's like, is it really, or is it a crisis of our own making? Because we are excluding so many people. And that whole passport privilege thing, like I say, it's not about where you live, as we've learned now. It doesn't matter that I live in the UK and pay taxes and this is where my family is. The fact that my nationality is South African determines where in the world I can go without jumping through hoops and paying money.
Wow. Yeah, it is bizarre. Just out of interest then, I think I might know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So Dave's brother emigrated to the US a few years ago. We've had him on the podcast. I He still very much thinks of himself as British, despite the fact he uses words like trash can and sidewalk,
plant for
Yeah.
factory.
Faucet, water.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so it was we look at him as being very
Trunk.
Americanized.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. Do you see yourself as a little bit British, or are you most definitely South African?
That is such a difficult question, and it's interesting. I was talking to my kids about it this weekend because it comes down to culture and identity, right? And someone asked me last week and said, do you miss home? And I was like, this is home.
I am home. Yeah.
I can't speak about South Africa as home anymore because I haven't been back there since 2021 when I left. But first and foremost, I see myself as human and part of the human race, as you said. But I think I'll probably, I don't know if this can be used against me at a later point, very loyal to the crown and to, I've still got to apply for naturalization, okay? Got to be careful here. These things have a way of biting you. I think culturally, in terms of our identity, I think for me, I'll probably always feel mostly South African. I think no matter what a passport says or a piece of paper, I was born somewhere else. I was raised somewhere else. Even though our values are similar, I think there's a lot of things that are very different. And that's also to your point, Gaz, around that the assimilating and how easy or how difficult is it. I think for some people it might be a lot harder, trying to assimilate into a Western culture. Again, for us, it's not that difficult because lots of similarities. Sunday roast isn't interesting for me. I grew up having Sunday roasts. It's not like, oh, wow. But I think for a lot of people, it might be difficult because it is very different. It would be like me going to a country, perhaps say, if I were to move to somewhere in Asia where the culture is very different and, all of you are very tall. I mean, I'm like 5'10", 5'11". All of us would stand out like sore thumbs because we'd practically be giants. That would be the first thing that would other us. So yeah, it's an interesting ride, is all I can say.
Yeah, it is interesting because I know one of the issues that you'll tend to find is when you talk about sort of integration into society and what have you, and what as an element of the British public will have an issue with banding together. But yeah, the bizarre thing is, when us Brits go and live abroad in places like Spain, then I mean, there's British pubs and what have you. You know what I mean? There's no assimilation. There's no expectation there for us to do the same. There's an expectation for them coming over here. They best not be making them smelly foods.
Yeah, and you go into parts of Spain and you talk about the expat community, and it's like people that will go to.
So you're an expat, but I'm an immigrant.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
You come and live in South Africa and you call yourself an expat, but I come and live here, and I'm an immigrant.
No, I look 100%, and I've got this thing whereby you move into a different country and you start living in a different country, and the expectation is in a way from some people is that you take on board their culture and you start to live the way that they live. So if that's the case, why do you get, I'll say expat, but why do you get communities of people living together in a foreign country? So you can go and get the expat community where they're all Brits and you go down the Dog and Duck. Well, where are you? Benidorm or London? It's that type of thing. So, but if you were truly, I suppose, if you were truly conscious of your footprint and how you are within the community, you would end up living in various different places and you wouldn't all gravitate to the same place. So therefore you wouldn't have expat communities. You just have people communities, and there wouldn't be an expat community. You would just live in communities, and you can go into London and Manchester and you can look at Chinatown or Little Italy and those those people that are of that nationality all bound around the same place. Well, you're not just that to me isn't what it's about. It should be about true diversity and living within the community, but not necessarily creating your own community within a slightly wide one, if that makes sense. So you don't have a Little Italy or a Chinatown. Just go and disperse yourself within the local communities, and it just becomes a community, if that makes sense.
I think it's an interesting sociological question, though, because if I look like in London, around Clapham, you hear a lot of South Africans, you hear a lot of Aussies, you change trains in Clapham, and it's a very different experience to changing trains somewhere else. And I think a lot of younger people, I can understand, like, they'll go and live with, people from the same place, because a lot of them are also sharing accommodation, and then it becomes a cultural thing. But
and is it a safety thing? Is it like a safe space thing? You go into somewhere and you seek out what you know and what you are used to.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know that a lot of people would do what we did, which is just pack up, 2 kids and 13 boxes and 7 bags and say, okay, right, we're out of here. Right. And go and choose to live in a random place. So I think for some people it is about safety and it's about community. And if you think about it, we've lived in this house for close on 4 years now. I don't really know my neighbors. There's not really that sense of community. There's not the stuff that you see in the movies doesn't happen. And I think a lot of people, maybe when they make the move, it is so scary. And it's also about, I think social media has helped, because we can find that community online and you can ask the questions. But there's a lot of things here that I still don't quite understand how it works. Like getting fined if your child is sick and misses too much school. Like, where in your life, do you want to criminalize this? Like, it is bizarre. So there's a lot of things.
Education system.
Listen, there's, battering fish, beer battered fish. No, why? This is an island. Like, I expect the best fish I've ever tasted in my life. But no, instead, it's
not the ones that swim up the River Thames or whatever. You don't want to be eating them. They're not very good.
No, so I think maybe it's just about finding people who can answer questions and who can help you and point you in the right direction.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is, people focus on, what having people move here will take away from our Britishness, rather than focusing on what they add to the culture, what they add to society, the different things you can experience and learn from other cultures. And I think that's focused on far too much. How do we go about educating people? The people who've got it wrong, have this idea. How do we help to educate those folks?
That is, gosh, how much time do we have? I think it's exposure. It's interesting for me that a lot of the people who will complain about these things and spew this rhetoric are doing so without truly understanding their own history and their own origin story and, colonialism and all of these things. But it's interesting how Brits love themselves a curry. Curry did not originate here. Got very bad news. A lot of, people will be drinking imported beer. Heineken isn't British. Your Stella isn't a British beer. So I think a lot of that is, I think the biggest thing is just showing exactly what you said, which is it's not about a scarcity mindset. It's about abundance. There's enough for all of us. Me being here is to add to your experience. Not to take away from it. I'm not in your way. I'm not here to steal your job, steal your money. And really, we do need to educate people around this whole drain on the economy or drain on resources, because I'm not a drain on resources. I've had to pay for it.
Yes.
And so has everyone else, in a similar position. So I think it's about having these conversations. And interestingly, it's something that South Africans are very good at because of our history with apartheid and moving beyond that and out of that. And as a people, I mean, we've got 11 official languages, actually 12 if you add sign language. Right. So we're a very multicultural society, as it is. And most of us can speak very openly about our experiences and our differences in culture and language, and yet also the things that unite us. And I think perhaps one of the problems here in the UK is, and I don't know if we blame like Victorian times for this, I think there's too many taboos. There's too many things that people consider you just don't speak, you don't talk about those things. And when we don't talk about those things, people are going to get their information from, questionable sources.
Yeah.
And they're going to repeat. It's like in the US, if, to use an example, if Pete Buttigieg isn't constantly on Fox News explaining things, there's a whole portion of the US population that's not going to get the message because they get their news from this one source. And I think we need people to openly challenge that immigrant stigma and that rhetoric around drain on the economy and all of these things. That's the only way that we're going to change it, is by talking and by sharing and giving people a space to ask some really uncomfortable questions.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think that is important because, people do have questions. And like you say, I guess if you're not talking about these things, then how are people expected to learn?
I think possibly my perception is that some people come from quite insecure ignorance. It's that there is an ignorance surrounding immigration. I've got no doubt about that, and almost a little bit of, I say, an insecurity in your own how you feel about it, because you're not totally confident. So therefore, these immigrants are coming here, they're stealing our jobs, and it's just that ignorance of that, and the whole insecurity around the whole concept of immigration, I suppose. And well, what would happen? Well, all of a sudden, if one comes over and steals our job, and then what's stopping 100,000 coming over to steal all of our jobs? And then where are we? And it is that insecurity bit, I feel. But you look at the rhetoric in the news and the media, and there is an ignorance around it, I think.
Yeah,
it's just about countering that, the whole stealing our jobs. What jobs? The jobs that you don't want, the all the care work, because there's so many old people here and you don't want to take care of your own old people. So you've got to ship people in from elsewhere who are willing to do the work that you won't. Yeah. So, okay, fine. Here's a job for you tomorrow. You can start tomorrow and you can work for minimum wage. Oh, sorry, you don't want to, so it's that thing as well. And I think people, as you say, it's fear and it's insecurity, and people like that, unfortunately, we can't take that approach with them, because the minute we confront them with that cold, hard truth, we just actually get them, they're just more defensive. So the only thing that we can do is I tell everyone that I possibly can about, the whole paying for the NHS thing, because people don't know that, and they're always shocked and surprised. Yeah. The whole needing a visa, to go to France. I can't go to a Christmas market with my kids if they want, their dad will have to take them. I mean, I can, but again, you've got to prove the ties that you have and that you're going to come back, and a visa can always be denied, so we've got to keep talking about this, because like you say, people just assume that there's thousands of immigrants streaming in and stealing everyone's jobs. So it's really just fear, and it's sad for me that instead of talking about hope, that, we're constantly sowing fear and division and othering people so easily. It's sad, and it's sad that people fall for that as well.
It is sad. It is sad. So we're coming close to the hour mark now. So say, for example, I'm looking at moving to the US, or Gaz has been pondering his move to Syria for quite some time now. What would be the one piece of advice that you would give to us?
I mean, unless you have balls of steel and nerves of steel, don't do it. Because immigrating is not easy. It's really, really hard. And the things that you miss, it's not the things that you think you'll miss. You miss people, you miss your people. your friends, your family, the places that you go, those are the things that you miss. So I would say, unless you can get over that, definitely don't even consider doing it. And the other thing that I would say is, do research. And then when you do make the move, I think one of the healthiest things that you can do is to leave those expat groups.
Yeah.
And you've also got to do work to fully immerse yourself in the new place that you're living and in the new culture. And that is why someone like David's brother will be using American language, because else they simply do not understand us. So I've learned to say roundabout. That's not what we call them in South Africa, so it's those little things, because otherwise people don't know what you're saying.
Yeah.
We're still going to take the piss out of Steve for doing it,
though. Yeah, we always will.
I mean, he's going force it, like, really.
Yeah. Dave, how are your balls? Are they steely? Have you got any more questions to us?
I'm not going to Syria, and I'm certainly not going to America, although I think I'd probably rather go to Syria than America, to be honest. No, I think that, my wife's parents were in the Windrush. They came over from Jamaica in the 50s.
Yeah.
And went on to have 7 kids, all of which are professionals, most of them with university degrees in very professional jobs. So it is a complete fallacy that just because somebody's come here from another country, they're going to be a drain. There's just as much chance as people, and maybe even more chance than native people, that they're going to go on to succeed and contribute to the economy. And, the fact that you're paying for the NHS and what you've paid is probably, compared to I don't know, you keep falling over and spraining your ankles, but in terms of your use, you're probably paying far more as a sort of percentage of the use than Joe Blogs in the street, particularly some of the kind of feckless people, which will be the ones that are, the sort of racist and low lives people that probably don't particularly work much and don't contribute to society, and perhaps haven't paid that many taxes, so haven't contributed towards the NHS, but probably the same sort of people that are in there at 3 a.m. on a Saturday morning, having got drunk and got into a brawl and had a bottle broken over the head. So yeah, I think there's perspective on it, and it's Gaz did an excellent job of tiptoeing around the illegal immigrant. He had a little monologue there, and he went round a few times and tread very carefully. But it is a very difficult subject, because I think we do have borders, and you can't. Any nation can't just say, anybody anywhere, just come if you want, it's not a problem, just come, we'll find somewhere for you to live, to sleep, we'll make sure you have food. And because the way we are in this country, we don't generally let people starve and die on the streets, so we would look after people, generally speaking, to the minimum standard. So you've got to have some kind of control, and then once you accept that, because I think you do, unless the whole world decides you don't, then what those controls are, where you draw those lines, and how you make those rules is just terribly, terribly difficult. But there's some things that are clearly unfair, and there's some things that are just bonkers, like the amount of effort that taxpayers in this country go through to prove that Deborah can come to this country and pay taxes and contribute. It just seems absolutely bonkers to me.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we're at the hour mark now. It's where we like to wrap things up. Deborah, did you want to say goodbye to our listeners and leave us with your Springer's final thoughts?
Thank you very much for listening to my story. And I didn't get into our time in the quarantine hotel at the airport. That's a story for another day. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. And I think, for folks who are willing to open their hearts and just open their communities and just embrace change and embrace new. And, and I'm very thankful that I get to live in this country and I get to do work that I love, and it's beautiful here. And yes, I can bitch and moan about the weather and the fish and chips. But it is a really nice place to live. And And I'm really thankful that my children get to grow up here and that it's safe. So thank you for listening. And maybe next time you hear some bullshit rhetoric about immigrants, think twice about where you're getting your information from and what information you're spreading, because your children are also learning from you.
Yeah, that's important. That is important. I've learned a thing or two. I bet you've learned a thing or two as well, haven't you, Gaza?
Yeah, I absolutely. Just in terms of the fees and then the ongoing fees almost. Yeah, and I, I would like to think I'm a relatively educated human being, and I didn't know that. So absolutely. So Deborah, thank you Dave, don't you smile, start laughing at that. I can see you. No, but Deborah, I obviously, I appreciate you sharing your story, and it's been fascinating, just the decisions and the processes and the almost the hoops that you've had to jump through in order to almost prove that you can do what it is that you're currently doing. So, for me personally, thank you very much for coming on our podcast, and I've thoroughly enjoyed listening to your story, and if we can just educate just one person or two people on the issue of immigration, then we've sort of done okay.
Indeed. David, have you got any final thoughts to add?
It's gone all Welsh on me. He is Welsh. You wouldn't know it, but he's actually Welsh and part Cherokee or quarter Cherokee. I forget the equations.
It's not quite a quarter, but it's there or thereabouts.
It's in there somewhere.
Cherokee.
Yeah. No, it's been really interesting, Deborah, and I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story and educating the. I was going to say the nation, but you're educating 70 how many countries?
67
countries. So if they're all tuned in, and we all get them to accept people moving around our world and sharing our cultures and experiences, what a much better place we'd be all living in. I do have one final question then, Deborah.
Okay. Is it about rugby?
No, I hate rugby. It's a stupid game played with the wrong shaped ball. What do you call roundabouts in South Africa?
It's a traffic circle.
Well,
Makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. Can't argue with that one.
Yeah. We call traffic lights robots though, which is very weird. But
you were doing so well until then.
Until I said robots, I know. And now the wheels have come off.
Yeah, no credibility left. Thank you, Deborah.
No.
Thank you, James.
Indeed, no, thank you. I've learned a lot today, and hopefully anybody who's tuned in from any of those 67 countries, and who knows, you might even get a 68 from this episode.
You never know.
Who knows, indeed, that they'll have learned something too. And hopefully, if I was going to do the Sly Stallone there at the end of Rock, if I can change, you can change, we all can change. I'm not going to do that. But yeah, please listen, folks, and please share, and hopefully you can take something away that you didn't know from this episode. And we'll be back next week when we are joined by a New York City police officer to share her experiences and tell us some stories from the book that she wrote about it. So we will see you next week. Thank you and goodbye.